Now we have this panel on BDS and anti-Israel activities. First, you will hear from Tammi Rossman-Benjamin, and then a short response by Robin Stoller. Tammi Rossman-Benjamin, it's a great pleasure that you made all the way here. I think you are the person who comes from the farthest away, if not Evelyn, I'm not sure. But Tammi comes from California, is the co-founder and director of AMCHA, a non-profit organization that investigates, documents, and combats anti-Semitism at institutions of higher education in America. She was a faculty member in Hebrew and Jewish Studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz from 1969 to 2016. And for the last several years, she has been involved in efforts to study and combat the rise of campus anti-Semitism. She has written articles about academic anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and has lectured widely on these developments and the growing threat that they pose to the safety of Jewish students on university campuses. Please help me welcoming Tammi Rossman-Benjamin.
Okay, good morning, and thank you so much to the organizers. It's a real pleasure to be here. Can you hear me? Okay, great. This morning I want to speak with you about how the anti-Israel boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, or BDS, manifests itself on college campuses in the US, and what can be done about it. While acknowledging the recent Bundestag resolution condemning the anti-Semitic arguments and methods of BDS, I also want to draw your attention to a different aspect of BDS, namely its harmful effects on American college campuses and their students, particularly Jewish and pro-Israel students. But first, I'd like to give you a little history that will help put the American campus scene into better perspective. The genesis of BDS can be traced to a forum of 3,000 NGOs that took place in Durban, South Africa in September 2001, parallel to the UN World Conference Against Racism. That NGO forum, which was marked by numerous openly anti-Semitic outbursts, produced a declaration clearly motivated by unbridled hatred toward Israel and the Jewish people that laid out the framework for an international campaign to defame and isolate Israel as a pariah state with the ultimate goal of eliminating it. The declaration, based on a false analogy linking Israel to apartheid South Africa, laid out what has become known as the Durban Declaration, or the Durban Strategy, a two-part campaign involving anti-Semitic arguments and methods whose goal is to effect the dismantling of apartheid Israel in the same way as apartheid South Africa had been dismantled in the 1990s. The first part of the Durban Strategy involves making the argument that Israel is so evil it must be isolated and eliminated. Besides the apartheid label, which is applied to Israel no less than 15 times in the declaration, Israel is also falsely accused of settler colonialism and crimes against humanity, including racism, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. These, of course, continue to be the buzzwords of contemporary defamations of Israel accompanying BDS activity both on and off campus. The second part of the Durban Strategy, what the declaration refers to as its program and the Bundestag resolution as its methods, focuses on the implementation of an action plan that calls for the full cessation of all links between all states and Israel, as well as the imposition of mandatory and comprehensive sanctions and embargoes. This, of course, is the program of boycott, divestment, and sanctions that we know as BDS. In 2004 and 2005, the BDS National Committee, comprised of over 170 Palestinian organizations, including the PLO, Hamas, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, used the Durban Declaration and Strategy as the basis for formalizing 3 separate boycott campaigns. An economic boycott of Israel, including a boycott of Israeli companies and products, as well as divestment or withdrawing investments in companies that do business with Israel. A cultural boycott of Israel that works towards canceling cultural events or activities involving Israel or its cultural institutions and tries to prevent artists and athletes from performing in Israel. And finally, an academic boycott of Israel that works towards cutting all ties with Israeli universities and the scholars who represent them, and boycotting or working to cancel or shut down events, activities, agreements, or projects that promote, quote, the normalization of Israel in the global academy. The most visible form of BDS on American college campuses focuses on economic boycotts. This includes attempts to boycott the on-campus sale or use of Israeli products. For example, students demanding that the school's dining halls stop serving sabra hummus, which has been attempted on about 30 campuses since 2015. Even more prominent and pervasive are the votes in the student senates and sometimes by whole student body on resolutions calling on the school's trustees to disinvest or divest financial holdings in companies that do business with Israel. Since our organization has begun tracking them in 2015, 66 such votes have taken place on 44 campuses, with students voting for divestment in about half of those cases. However, although these Israeli product boycott and divestment efforts generate a lot of sound and fury, they have never resulted in a school's formal boycott or disinvestment from Israel, not once. So why do these efforts continue? Because while they may be unsuccessful in achieving part 2 of the Durban strategy, bringing the economic isolation and harm to Israel through boycott and divestment, in the weeks-long campaigns promoting these resolutions, they have been extremely successful in injecting onto campus via apartheid walls, op-eds in the student newspaper, invited speakers, demonstrations, etc., enormous amounts of propaganda portraying Israel as uniquely evil and worthy of elimination. Economic BDS efforts on campus are wholly organized and executed by anti-Zionist student groups, particularly Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP. Not coincidentally, the first SJP chapter was founded at the University of California, Berkeley, and began to actively promote anti-Israel divestment initiatives in early 2002, shortly after the Durban Declaration was issued. There are now about 200 SJP chapters across the country, a group whose core mission includes the promotion of BDS campaigns on their respective campuses. While students are the primary drivers of BDS efforts, faculty on U.S. campuses play a critical role in advocating for and implementing academic BDS. A boycott, though far less visible, has had far more of a negative impact on campus life and beyond. There are more than 1,000 faculty on over 100 U.S. college and university campuses who have publicly expressed support for an academic boycott of Israeli universities and scholars, the vast majority of them in departments in the humanities and social sciences. Some disciplines are actually dominated by BDS supporters, as can be seen by the number of academic associations that have passed resolutions endorsing an academic boycott of Israel or even considered such resolutions. So too are some university departments dominated by academic BDS supporters, as can be seen by this sampler list of departments at my university, the University of California, with large percentages of tenured faculty who have publicly supported an academic boycott of Israel. Now, it's true that just because faculty members sign a petition or express other extramural support for an academic boycott of Israel does not mean that they will try to implement it on their campus. In fact, until recently, there were few examples of faculty actually implementing academic BDS by taking one or more actions in compliance with the boycotts guidelines. These guidelines include refusing to write letters of recommendation for students wanting to study in Israel, or trying to shut down programs, exchange programs in Israel, impeding their colleagues' research collaborations and exchanges with Israeli universities and scholars, and working towards canceling or shutting down campus events or activities that, quote, promote the normalization of Israel in the global academy. However, within the last year, these incidents have shown with frightening clarity that faculty on US campuses are indeed willing and able to implement part 2 of the Durban strategy with regard to academic BDS by implementing these guidelines. And here are just a couple of examples. In September 2018, a faculty boycotter at the University of Michigan refused to write a letter of recommendation for his student wanting to study on a university-approved program in Israel. Soon after that, 1,000 academic boycotters signed a petition stating, "We too are supporters of the BDS movement and would not provide letters of support for students seeking to study in an Israeli university." Then, in November, the Faculty Senate of last year, the Faculty Senate at Pitzer College, a small private school in Southern California, voted to shut down the school's study abroad program in Israel, a vote that was by a large majority, that was spearheaded by a professor who was very active in the academic boycott movement. And finally, just last month, New York University's Department of Social and Cultural Analysis, whose chair and half of the directors of its affiliated programs have endorsed academic BDS, voted by a large majority to cut all ties with NYU's Tel Aviv program, including by refusing to sponsor faculty teaching in the program or to facilitate faculty exchanges between the department and Tel Aviv program. It's important to point out that although academic BDS was intended to be implemented by faculty, students have also played a key role in its implementation, particularly that part of the boycott calling for the cancellation or shutting down of events or activities that promote the normalization of Israel on campus. Our organization has compiled a list of hundreds of incidents of SJP or other anti-Zionist student groups disrupting and attempting to shut down pro-Israel events and activities, and other attempts to suppress pro-Israel student expression. In recent years, these anti-normalization efforts have gone beyond the suppression of speech and even included attempts to boycott the overall participation of pro-Israel students and student groups in campus life. These have included attempts to block pro-Israel students from joining student government or pro-Israel groups from receiving student government funds, signs posted on campus saying Zionists not welcome here, declarations of non-cooperation with Zionist groups, and calls at protests and rallies with shouts of Zionists off our campus, in this case, Zionists out of CUNY. All of these efforts were undertaken in the service of advancing academic BDS. Returning to our focus on faculty, while the evidence of their complicity in implementing academic BDS is still rather limited, there is a plethora of evidence showing that faculty boycotters are indeed using their academic positions and university resources to advocate for BDS and to promote the anti-Semitic arguments that are its foundation, what we've been calling part one of the Durban strategy. Here are just a couple of anecdotal examples. For several years, California State University mathematics professor, who is an academic BDS leader, has been using his university server to promote his webpage entitled Boycott Israel Resource Page. Besides calling for and advocating for the economic, academic, and cultural boycott of Israel, the website contains a litany of false and inflammatory statements and photographs like that one, intended to incite hatred and promote political activism against the Jewish state, particularly BDS. Omar Barghouti, founder of the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, or PACBI, gave invited lectures promoting academic BDS on 3 University of California campuses. Barghouti's presentations, which were filled with anti-Israel propaganda laced with classic anti-Semitic tropes, were each sponsored by multiple academic departments. Talks such as Barghouti's are not at all unusual. Over the last few years, our organization has documented hundreds of departmentally sponsored talks, panels, and conferences at which speakers promote BDS and make demonizing and delegitimizing accusations about Israel and its supporters that are straight out of the Durban Declaration. Besides these anecdotal examples, our organization has conducted a few empirical studies to investigate whether and to what extent faculty bring their extramural support for BDS onto their campuses. In one study, we looked at more than 500 departments of ethnic, gender, and Middle East studies across the country to see whether the presence of faculty boycotters in these departments increased the likelihood that their department would sponsor a public event that included pro-BDS speakers. And we found that departments with 1 or more faculty boycotters were 5 to 12 times more likely to sponsor public events with pro-BDS speakers, and the more faculty boycotters in a department, the more events with pro-BDS speakers. Of the BDS speaker events that we actually had recordings of and could analyze for content, a little over half included speakers who promoted BDS at the actual event itself. And finally, in a soon-to-be-published study of ours, looking at dozens of syllabi of courses on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that were taught at schools across the country, we found that course instructors who support academic BDS include in their courses, on average, 4 times more readings authored by BDS supporters than instructors who don't support any form of BDS. The findings of these studies taken together provide compelling evidence that faculty boycotters have been highly successful in carrying out part 1 of the Durban strategy when it comes to academic BDS. They have not only been able to make the arguments that Israel is an apartheid, settler colonial, racist, and genocidal state in their classrooms and conference halls, but they've actually been providing these arguments with academic legitimacy, allowing them to flourish on campus and well beyond. The critical question, of course, is what's to be done about addressing the problem of BDS on US college campuses. I'd like to tell you about 2 strategic approaches that our organization has adopted one, I think, more promising than the other. The first approach focuses on the anti-Semitic nature of BDS's arguments and methods. It involves making a two-step case that begins with the claim, identical to the one put forth in the recent Bundestag resolution, that anti-Israel boycotts and the defamatory language that accompanies them are indeed anti-Semitic. Once this has been established, the case is made, then, that because of its anti-Semitic nature, such expression and behavior should be treated by the university as other bigotries like racism and sexism. So that's the first strategy or the first approach. Those are the two steps in making that argument and getting some impact from that. In our own efforts based on this approach, we've actually encountered three serious, I would say fatal difficulties. The first is that while the US and dozens of other countries have adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, or IRA definition, that identifies anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism, there is considerable resistance to this definition from some students and faculty on US campuses, especially, and I would say not surprisingly, those who are most actively engaged in anti-Zionist activity. The second challenge in using this approach is the very robust protection afforded speech under the US Constitution, the First Amendment. Except in very rare cases, hateful speech, whether anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, etc., is considered free speech. It's protected speech in America, including on college campuses. University administrators are rightfully resistant to limiting expression in the campus square, even if they acknowledge it is anti-Semitic, lest it leave the school open to a legal battle that it is unlikely to win. And finally, the protections afforded faculty under the principle of academic freedom are also quite robust and have made it virtually impossible to prohibit faculty from using their academic positions and university resources to promote BDS and anti-Israel propaganda. And this is so even when a faculty boycotter's area of expertise has nothing at all to do with Israel or the Middle East, such as in the case of the mathematics professor that I mentioned, who has been using his school's website to host his Boycott Israel resource page. Academic freedom, we're told. For these reasons, the numerous efforts made by our organization to address campus BDS, based on its anti-Semitic arguments and methods, have thus far been unsuccessful. The second approach to combating BDS, particularly academic BDS, avoids these pitfalls by focusing on a different aspect of BDS expression and action, namely its harmful impact on members of the campus community, and then trying to urge university officials to address these specific damages and harms. It's based on the fact that while academic BDS ostensibly targets Israeli universities and scholars, it simply cannot be implemented without considerable collateral damage to US students and faculty. What does this collateral damage look like? Well, first, there is considerable evidence that academic BDS substantively harms Jewish and pro-Israel students. In our organization's 2018 survey of anti-Semitic activity on US campuses, we found that about half of the incidents targeting Jewish students for harm, anti-Semitic acts, including harassment, vandalism, and assault, more than half of those were the result of attempts at silencing pro-Israel expression that were consistent with the guidelines of academic BDS. In addition, other studies our organization has carried out have shown that schools with BDS activity are 3 times more likely to host acts of aggression against Jewish students. Second, Academic BDS clearly hurts any student or faculty member who wants to travel to or study about Israel. Faculty boycotters who refuse to write letters of recommendation for their students wanting to study in Israel, who try to shut down their schools' exchange programs with Israeli universities and scholars, or who sabotage research collaborations with Israeli scholars are directly impeding the educational opportunities and academic freedom of their own students and colleagues. Third, by impeding the flow of objective information about a complex topic of global importance, academic BDS deprives students of critical knowledge for adequately understanding the world and dangerously miseducates a whole generation of America's future leaders. Finally, by substituting hateful political propaganda for genuine scholarship about Israel, academic BDS corrupts the entire academic mission of the university and seriously erodes the public trust in institutions of higher education. Recently, our organization has undertaken efforts to address these harms. One set of efforts has been directed toward getting university administrators across the country to first acknowledge that academic BDS hurts their own students and faculty, and then to take steps to ensure that they will not allow the implementation of academic BDS on their campus because of those harms. Last December, we coordinated a coalition of more than 100 organizations to petition 250 university presidents across the country, asking them to speak out about and address the direct threats that an academic boycott poses to students and faculty on their own campuses. The effort resulted in a landmark statement issued by all 10 of the University of California chancellors, declaring that the implementation of an academic boycott of Israel on University of California campuses, quote, poses a direct and serious threat to the academic freedom of our students and faculty. Another very promising development has come out of the University of Michigan. In response to the Michigan faculty members' refusal to write a letter of recommendation, the school not only sanctioned the professor, imposed disciplinary measures on him, but assembled a faculty panel to investigate the question, what ought to be the intersection between political thought ideology and a faculty member's responsibility to students? Notice they framed the question very broadly. It wasn't about Israel, it wasn't about academic boycott, or even about letters of recommendation. It actually got to the heart of the matter. In March, the panel issued its report and recommendations that included the core statement of principle, quote, as faculty members make judgments and act in their role as teachers, they must do so based solely on educational and professional reasons. Okay, this is a hugely important statement. And then last month, the Michigan provost, the second in command there, officially adopted those recommendations and committed to establishing procedures for bringing forward concerns about faculty who violate them. So policies and procedures to go along with that, with those recommendations. Moving forward, we hope to offer the Michigan panel's recommendations and the provost's commitment to developing policies and procedures for enforcing them as a model for university leaders in dealing with BDS. We also intend to raise this issue with state and federal legislators and other government officials who are charged with ensuring that public funds are used to promote education and research and not boycott them, right? I think that this is a hugely important issue, not just for universities, but for the states that fund them. To conclude, I hope I've been able to broaden your understanding of BDS, how it manifests itself on college campuses in the US, and what can be done about it. I also hope that you can see that BDS is not just a problem for Israel or Jews, and not just a problem on US college campuses. BDS is fueled by hatred, and hatred has a toxic effect on both victim and victimizer, as well as on the society that allows it to flourish. And to that extent, BDS is everyone's problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tammi. We wanted to have this discussion together with to compare the situation to Europe or to Germany. So very briefly, Robin Stoller will now give a sort of response or a description of the situation here in Germany. Robin Stoller is the co-founder and chair of the board of directors of the International Institute for Education and Research on Antisemitism, based here in Berlin. She is vice chair of the research network Ethnic Relations, Racism and Antisemitism of the European Sociological Association. Kim has been coordinating projects to confront antisemitism and/or conferences on antisemitism in several European countries, as well as in Morocco, where she did very interesting field work, what is not the topic of today. Kim's research expertise is on nationalism and antisemitism in the guise of hatred against Israel. The floor is yours, Kim. Thank you.
Okay, hi. In the meantime, I just realized that this PowerPoint moved back. So I want to add a few words to what Tammi just mentioned on the whole context of BDS and the international campaign to delegitimize Israel. I think what is very important to know, and you mentioned the word anti-normalization a few times, there's already been a boycott of Israel or the Yishuv before the state has even been founded. Back then in the 30s, in 1945, when the Arab League was founded, the first thing what they did, a boycott of the state of Israel. So in 2003, for example, and later on in 2013, there were several attempts in Morocco, I just want to mention this, to criminalize contacts with Israel, Israelis, Israeli institutions, and companies, with 2 to 5 years of imprisonment. There was a bill to be voted at the Moroccan parliament, which later on was put down by the 5 major parties in Morocco. So to understand BDS and the boycott of the Jewish states, individuals, and so on, we also have to look at the whole Arab Islamic discourse on the subject and how this influenced the Durban Conference, as well as nowadays campaigns when speakers were forced not to act, for example, in Israel, or artists are being asked by the BDS movement not to play or to act in Israel as well. So coming to Germany, I want to give a few examples. On the one hand, I don't know if you're aware of it, but the situation in Germany is quite different than the one in the US. We had just last weekend, on Friday, we had there were supposed to be 2 major events related to BDS. One was with Professor Farid Esak. He's the head of the BDS South Africa. He was supposed to speak at the World Protestant Church Day, and this event was cancelled by the Protestant Church in Germany. This is one thing. The second thing, another person deeply involved in the BDS thing is Khaled Barakat. He's one of the leading figures of the PFLP in Europe and living currently in Germany. He was, when he was supposed to speak at an event in Berlin, co-organized by different groups, including in the context of Samidun, which is a PFLP prisoners support structure. He was stopped by German police and was not able to speak at the event, and he was asked to not speak anymore on German soil on PFLP or other related activities. Those who know, like the whole structure of BDS, also know that major leaders in Germany are affiliated to the PFLP. So to give you a few numbers of BDS in Germany and how this compares to the context in the US, if we look at Germany, we did a small survey, and I want to give you a few preliminary results. The context BDS activities related to overall anti-Israel activities with a hateful content in Germany over the years 2017 to 2019. This includes rallies, lectures, campaigns, conferences, petitions. So out of the whole bunch of activities hateful against Israel, including calls for boycott, just 250 of the whole 1,000 activities had some relation to BDS or were in the context of BDS. Out of those 250 activities, just 150 had a direct involvement of groups with the title BDS or who are central players and strong supporters of BDS. There are a few main cities where BDS activities took place, but it's not, compared to the US, such a big thing in all over Germany. I want to put this in the context of the universities. There were just a small number of BDS events at Germany, at German universities, for example in Freiburg, Hamburg, Kassel, Mainz, Tübingen, and a few other cities. And several events, BDS events, were cancelled after it became public that that such event takes place in Germany. For example, also one or several events of Farid Esak, the BDS South Africa head. What we know, and we will speak later on, or we will have at the last panel, we have a session on anti-Semitism and how the problems of Jewish kids at German schools, and also like Jewish teachers at German schools. There we will hear more, but we have reports from all over Germany that the syllabi are problematic, but we don't have the exact numbers as Tammi has in the US. We have just a few faculty members who signed BDS. It's a small number, and they often have an international background. But what we have is often a not friendly environment for Jewish or Israeli students at university, especially in the context when there are confrontations between Israel and Hamas, or Israel during the Lebanon war, and so on, especially if they are not condemning Israel. So what we can say, compared to the US context, it's at university, it's not such a big deal as also what we heard from foreign colleagues from abroad, for example in the UK or in Spain or in the US or South America. So what we can say for Germany is, and I think this is important, compared to this number, this chart shows anti-Israel rallies and demonstrations in Germany in 2017, 2018. And most of them were not related to BDS. Those demonstrations were mainly organized by Hamas front-end organizations, broader anti-Israel organization, PFLP-related activities, and Muslim Brotherhood activities, plus church-related organizations. But not main actor there is BDS. Just to put it in a frame, what we should discuss when we think about what's going on in Germany and where's the hateful contact, the hateful content is coming from here. So compared to the US, we also have a lot of condemnation of BDS and anti-Semitic boycotts in general. So I just give you a short overview to understand. Tammi mentioned the latest declaration against BDS, the resolution at the German Bundestag, but this of course has a history, and I want just to illustrate a little bit what happened over the last years. So the political parties started to issue condemnations or resolution against BDS, especially since, let's say, 2017-18. Some, or the CDU is one of the earliest, it was at the end of 2016. Some parties had to deal with calls for boycott even earlier, especially the left party, which already condemned boycotts of Israel and called for boycotts of Israel during the time of the Mavi Marmara. I don't know if you remember, there were a few left party MPs involved back then. So cities and state parliaments, the latest one of the Berlin Senate was in 2018, and then other ones as well. We see there has been a number of declarations already before the Bundestag decision, and also before another resolution against anti-Semitism, which was issued in January 2018, which condemned all forms of anti-Semitism, including calls for boycott at the German Bundestag. On the student level, I just give you a brief overview. I think what is important, even if there were condemnation by different student councils and the use of political parties, the latest joint declaration against BDS by student council was just issued in Frankfurt by a conference organized of the Freie Zusammenschluss Studierender and Junge Forum der Deutsch-Israelischen Gesellschaft, but those who signed and condemned the BDS in a joint declaration and anti-Semitism in general included the youth organizations or the students' representation, ranging from the Green Youth towards the youth of the Christian Democratic Party. So, including the FZS, which is more the non-affiliated entity. So in the German context, I would say on the student level, we are in a much better situation than in other countries in Europe and the US. And I hope that BDS will not get into the whole university system as it happened abroad. Okay, I will leave it at this point here. Thank you.